Welcome back to another episode of the Media Pass. I'm your host, Alex, joined by my other host, Matt. Matt, as always, how you doing?
I am phenomenal now that I'm seeing you, Alex.
It's been a while.
I was distraught, and now I am rejuvenated with your presence, man. Oh, Celsius
We're
today?
here. Yeah, I'm switching it up a little bit. Coke Zero, don't get me wrong, I still got Coke Zero stocked in the fridge, but I've needed a little extra kick lately. And I know they sponsor people. It'd be real nice if we got a Celsius sponsorship. Maybe one day.
Would not mind that.
We do have questions.
Oh, really?
I don't know how many we have. I'm going to pull them up real quick. But I mentioned questions at the beginning of last pod, and we got a few of them. So, first of all, we got one comment requesting more chapter timestamps on YouTube for the episodes. We will make an effort to do that. I cannot promise we will have super exact timestamps, and I can't promise that it will be done for every episode because we're a two-man operation. We do not have like a team doing this, and there are only
Unless
so many
you want
hours
to be part
in
of
the
that
day.
team.
Yeah, so we can't pay you, but you know,
An intern?
I can't even say you'll get that much exposure because we don't even have that much of an audience for this podcast. But you know, experience, I guess. I'm setting expectations low. One question we got was, which young core would you pick to have more success going forward between the Magic and the Rockets? Do you have an answer for that?
Oh, man, this one's a tough one. I saw this on Twitter a lot. Without like digging too deep into it all, I feel like I'd take the Magic. I just see like a more versatile kind of like Şengün's like a really, really good player, but he's also like a certain type of player. And I feel like you have to build a certain type of team around him. And I just like the fit between Wagner, Banchero, and Suggs a lot. I think Anthony Black's coming along nicely. They're very rangy, athletic team, can play, very physical. I don't know. I was watching the Rockets play the Cavs the other day, though. And Ausar Thompson and Jabari Smith really, really looking good. So I guess I'll lean Magic. What about you?
So I would also lean the Magic, but not for, I mean, yes, I agree with what you said. Not disagreeing by any means, but also for different reasons, I would say the Magic. And it's almost like I have a tough time treating the Rockets the same as like other young cores because they kind of jumped the gun on the rebuild, in my opinion. Yes, they have Şengün, Jabari Smith, Jalen Green, Ausar Thompson. They have a Cam Whitmore, Tari Eason. They have a good young core, but it seems like they went for like the Fred VanVleet and the Dylan Brooks. And before someone comes at me and says Dylan Brooks is part of the young core, Dylan Brooks is like 27 years old. Dylan Brooks is not young. He kind of still had I think because he came in as an older rookie. He kind of like kept the young label, and he was with the Grizzlies, and the Grizzlies were like the young team for a while. But yeah, I mean, the Rockets are just like, they're still a young team. They still have a good young core, but the Magic are more of like what I would consider like a traditional young core where they still have the flexibility. That's the big difference. And it's not that the Rockets don't have flexibility. I just think the Magic took the more traditional young core route and are still kind of deep in the midst of that. And don't get me wrong, they're great. The Magic are potentially a top 4 seed in the Eastern Conference. But anyways, we're going to do a whole podcast on young cores at some point. I know we've talked about it before, but be on the lookout for that, where we'll probably dive into this a lot deeper. Who is your favorite meme player, past or present? I'm guessing this comment was asking, like the like funny moment kind of players, like the Lance Stevensons of the world, the Chris Bosh, like popping up in front of the camera, that GIF. I don't really I can't think of a ton of meme players off the top of my head.
I like Antoine Walker for this one. I feel like he just had the guys aren't built like that anymore. especially guys who are like pretty good, they're not built like him anymore. And I don't know. There was that one, something about shot. I don't know. There's this funny one about like taking threes. He's like, why do you take so many threes? Because there's no 4-point line. Just thought it was funny. I don't know. I think he's just a funny guy. He's got all the, like, he checks all the boxes for like funny NBA player meme.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's about all the time we need to spend on that question. Thank you as always for the questions. If you have any, be sure to leave them in the comments of this episode, and we will try to answer them on the next episode. If we have too many questions, then we might just have to start doing Q&A episodes.
That'll be a good sign.
So, yes, that's a good problem to have. Matt, why don't you tell everybody what we're going to be talking about today? This is a topic that's near and dear to your heart. I know you're very excited about this. I am as well. Don't get me wrong. This is one of my favorite types of players. But yeah, why don't you set the table for everybody?
Yeah. So me and you, Alex, right? We're like niche NBA fans. Some would use the phrase junkie NBA fans. You know, it's problematic the way that we watch the game to our day-to-day lives. And as a part of that, I think we have like weird tastes for players, right? And for me, like one of my weird things is like I really love like non-shooting wings and forwards. I think there's just something super like aesthetic about them. Like they have such a high motor and they can go all out on defense, do all these crazy things on defense. And a lot of it's because they can't really do anything on offense. So they don't really exert themselves too much on that end of the court. But and so one guy who over the last year, it's been about a year to this day, honestly, where I started to really change my perception on. And unfortunately, I don't think we'll get to see him this playoffs. I think he's still hurt. Jarred Vanderbilt. I think he's still hurt. Okay. He's this guy, right? He's a forward who cannot shoot threes. And, you know, I watched him on the Timberwolves during the regular season. I watched him get traded to Utah and then the Lakers, and I see this guy in the regular season make like this huge difference. They're like a really nice positive difference. I'm like, why doesn't this guy play more minutes? Why is he only playing like 24 minutes a night? And then the playoffs roll around and he gets played off the court. And it goes from, I thought this guy was going to get more minutes in the playoffs. I thought something was going to happen in a series where he would get more minutes. He plays the Memphis Grizzlies, right? And he starts out the series being put on Ja Morant, right? And Ja Morant's just too fast for this dude. He's too fast for most guys in human history. But like that's really not the matchup Vanderbilt excels at. He's more of a off-ball chaser, or he's good on ball when in matchups where he can really use his length. But against guys with that kind of like straight line speed, it's a little bit tricky even for him. So when you combine the fact that he couldn't guard Ja Morant and he was killing their spacing, he started to fizzle out of the series, right? And then the Warriors series comes up, and in game one he played. I don't have it in front of me, but he played a lot of minutes, played a positive role in them winning that game. And I wrote an article about it. I was like, this series is going to be different for Vanderbilt because this is it. He gets to chase Steph Curry around. He's great at chasing these kind of dudes around. Curry's fast, but he's not like the Morant type of straight line speed. You know, it's more of a quickness, which Vanderbilt can handle. And lo and behold, Vanderbilt gets played out of the series again. Get a lot of Lonnie Walker, a lot of Dennis Schroeder. And again, it's because even with this being a better matchup for him defensively, it's just not enough to outweigh the problem he brings on offense, right? And so, like, why does this matter? Okay, we know Jarred Vanderbilt's probably not a playoff type player, but this rookie class and every rookie class, we always get a handful of these types of players. You know, they come in. I've been studying these last couple of weeks. I've been studying the Thompson twins. I've been studying Bilal Coulibaly. I've been studying Toumani Camara, who I really like, Gigi Jackson. It's all these guys, right, who like are long, athletic, rangy. And then it's like the questions like, can they shoot, right? And if you can shoot, okay, if you're long,
real
rangy.
Quick, I do want to take Gigi Jackson out of that equation personally.
I've come to the conclusion that Gigi Jackson can definitely shoot the basketball. He is
okay.
Wait, yeah, no, he can definitely. We could cite some stuff about him. He can stroke it. Okay, he can. Mark Jones once said he's got out to stroke it. Like the net is hurting. Like he can stroke it.
I didn't want Grizzlies fans getting mad at us. I wanted to clarify real quick.
11 threes per 100. 11 3-point attempts per 100, 36%. I have it drilled in my head, Alex. I know that guy. I just had to name him because he's getting scouted, right? And so I'm like, I sit there and I ask myself, I'm like, okay, when I'm scouting these guys, like, can they shoot, right? If they can shoot, that's like that's the easiest way to solve the problem. If they can shoot, great, awesome. They're going to be a spectacular role player, the kind of role player you see on championship teams. If they cannot shoot, how can they stay on the floor, right? So that's kind of like the genesis of this podcast. I want to talk more about that and kind of shine some light on how we should be viewing some of these guys as we kind of project them moving forward.
Yeah, so the first question that Matt, when he was kind of laying out what this episode was going to look like and kind of what we were going to talk about, the first question that he presented in the outline was what makes a good spacer? And Matt just now mentioned a lot about shooting, and shooting is important. But spacing, to me, spacing is not just about shooting. And Matt, I'm sure Matt agrees with that. Also, if you hear a siren going right now, they're testing the fire siren or the tornado siren like they do every Wednesday at noon. So apologies if anyone can hear that. But spacing is kind of it's thrown around and it's misused a lot because I think it is kind of an easy thing to point at and hand wave away bigger issues. So the question of like what makes a good spacer, to me, I kind of boiled it down to, and obviously there are some things that are out of your control, but we'll get to that. But I boiled it down to, do you know where to be on the floor depending on where the ball is, where the defenders are, and where your teammates are? At any given moment, are you consciously aware of how your presence in a certain spot on the floor is either going to make your teammates' life easier or your teammates' life harder? And based on where you are, is the defense having an easier time defending as a result of where you're at? Some things cannot be helped. If you're a 34% shooter from the corner on like one attempt per game, teams are helping off you. They're helping off you every time. They're totally fine with leaving you open in the corner if you're only going to attempt 1-3 a game, because they know, one, you're probably not shooting it. Two, if you are, you're only hitting it at a 34% clip. They like that math. But regardless of if you can shoot or if defenses are guarding you or not, are you taking actions to make sure that you can put yourself to be in a better spot when that help leaves you? For example, let's use Aaron Gordon as a really good example. Aaron Gordon, percentages or whatever with him, he's a limited volume 3-point shooter, will rarely take it. He'll take it if teams are leaving him open, and sometimes he'll make it, sometimes he won't. Teams are pretty happy with the math of Aaron Gordon being left open in the corner more often than not, it seems. But let's say Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic are running a pick and roll, and they blitz or hard hedge against Murray, and Murray gets it to Jokic on the short roll. The back line of defense is that comes off of Aaron Gordon to tag the roll. That back line of defense is stepping up to stop Jokic just past the nail, kind of in the middle of that paint area, outside the restricted area. At that point, okay, Aaron Gordon, you probably don't want to still be in the corner at that point. That's not the best place for you to be. At that point, Aaron Gordon, you'll often see, in these scenarios where Jokic gets it in the short roll and Murray was blitzed, trapped, hedged against, et cetera, when that back line of defense steps forward off of Aaron Gordon to stop Jokic and tag the roll, Aaron Gordon's going to make that baseline cut and usually get a dump off for an easy dunk. On the JJ Redick podcast, on the episode with Devin Booker, apparently the Suns call that France cut. And it's kind of it can be like a conscious play that you're running, like trying to get that back line of defense to come up and help so you can get that opportunity for a dump off for a slam or something along those lines. But it's also just in my opinion, a general philosophy thing of like, okay, they're helping off you to tag the roll, you need to cut. That's just, unless you're a good 3-point shooter. Obviously, if you're a good corner 3-point shooter, shoot the dang ball. We're not talking about guys who can shoot in this episode. But if that back line of defense comes to help, make that cut, move off the ball, and know where to be. And that creates it makes defenses less happy to help off of you. That is spacing to me. How do you capitalize? Yeah, go ahead.
Can I interject for a second? Because I think you're getting to the next level of all. Because Aaron Gordon is like, I feel like he's the genesis of this podcast. Forget the Jerry. Like he's the hero of this podcast, right? He's the main character of this story. Because I feel like like what you're talking about, he does the best job of all these guys at making up for the non-shooting element, right? Now, I just want to rein you in real quick, and I just want to talk about perimeter spacing for a second, right? Strictly perimeter spacing, okay? And the one guy who, somebody who lives in Detroit who sees a lot of Pistons Twitter, one guy who's been on my mind a lot is Isaiah Stewart, right? Isaiah Stewart, phenomenal defender, all right? People just forget how good of a defender. He's a true I can guard 1 through 5 guy, right? His defensive EPM right now is in the 86th percentile. That's really good, especially on a very bad team. 86th percentile defensive EPM, pretty good. For years, I've heard people say, if he can just get it up to that 35% 3-point shooting, right? 3-point efficiency doesn't really matter as much as we think it does for perimeter spacing, right? Like, if I had Aaron Gordon, let me look up Aaron Gordon real quick, since we have him, right, on our minds. Aaron Gordon is this year he's 28% 3-point shooter. So that doesn't help us. But last year he's 34.7% 3-point shooter. The year before that, 33.5% 3-point shooter. Okay. Aaron Gordon bumping up his 3-point percentage 1 or 2 percentage points. That's all he does not make you a better spacer. That's not going to make people stop helping off of him, right? What helps is shooting a ton of threes, because historically, nowadays, it's not the Antoine Walker world anymore, right? You're only allowed to shoot a lot of threes if you're a good 3-point shooter, right? If coaches have given you that green light, if you've demonstrated that, okay? So volume of threes, and then I think speed of release is another big thing. The thing I really look at is, and I'm not a shot doctor, but how much do you dip the ball when you catch it, right? Grayson, you ever see those those clips on Twitter of the no dip Grayson Allen 3 or the no dip Pack? You see that thing, right?
Yeah.
That ball's not
Nick
dipped at all.
Batum does it a lot.
Nick
Pat
Batum,
Connaughton does it a lot.
He was a legend.
Joe Ingles does it a lot. Yeah.
Exactly. So speed and volume, right? I want to give you an example. Isaac Okoro and Max Strus, they play on the exact same team, okay? And the sample is a little bit muddied because they share a lot of minutes, but I think it's still kind of instructive. But Isaac Okoro, 39% 3-point shooter, right? So he's done that thing. He did last season. He was played off the floor because he was a non-shooting wing. Teams helped off of him. So what did he do? He came in this season, improved his 3-point shooting, right? He's up to 39%. So what do you think in your head? You're like, in the postseason, oh, people are probably not going to help off this guy, right? The problem is he's 39% on 5.7 threes per 100, all right? Juxtapose that with Max Strus, who's having a down 3-point shooting season. He's at 34% on nearly 11 attempts per 100. So it's almost double, right? Even though they share a lot of minutes, the Cleveland Cavaliers still have a higher offensive rating. I think it's about 1.5 points higher when Max Strus is on the floor compared to when Isaac Okoro is on the floor. Despite Isaac Okoro hitting more of his threes, right? So what that tells us is I think it's very, very, very hard to go from being like this non-shooter like Isaac Okoro, who's on low volume, and then like trying to build out of that. And so I guess what I'm getting at with that, right, is if you don't have that volume component, if you don't have that speed of your release component, it's tricky to be a good perimeter spacer, right? And that's something that Aaron Gordon struggled with his first career. Now, like going back to the rookies I mentioned earlier, I don't have all of their numbers pulled up right in front of me now, but I know that Gigi Jackson is about a 36% three-point shooter, whereas somebody like Bilal Coulibaly is also like a 36, 37% three-point shooter. You'd probably think they're similar caliber spacers, but Gigi Jackson is shooting 11 threes per 100 possessions, while Bilal Coulibaly is only shooting about five or six threes per 100 possessions, right? And if you look at them, if you watch them shoot, you can see clearly that Gigi Jackson has a faster release than Bilal Coulibaly, and that's why he's able to take more threes. Because when they help off you, usually they're still closing out. And so if it takes you a long time to get that shot off, they're going to catch up to you, right? So when we think about that, right, that means Gigi Jackson can do this easy route. The easy route is just be a good perimeter spacer, okay? If you're like an off-ball player, just be a good perimeter spacer. Now, the guys like Bilal Coulibaly, who are not right now good perimeter spacers, they kind of have to go through this alternative means we're talking about, like what you alluded to with Aaron Gordon. But before we get to that, before we talk about that, because I think this is an important thing to mention, and Alex, I'm going to turn to you for this, but like, when do you not need to be a good perimeter spacer? Outside of the Aaron Gordon role player type, like what types of players can get away with not being a good perimeter spacer?
I feel like you're leading me into one of the things that you wanted to touch on, but like obviously if you're an on-ball guy who can,
there we go.
who can create off the dribble, not necessarily perimeter creation, but like, can you drive and collapse defenses and get by your first man and draw help at the nail or force help in the back line of defense? If you're a centers being a vertical threat, having to force that tag off the corner. Guys like that, they don't need to necessarily be high-level spacers or perimeter spacers, rather. I look at a guy like I actually mentioned this in the video I just did about Sabonis. Like Sabonis is not. I mean, he's efficiency-wise, he can shoot threes this year. He's been very efficient, just raw percentage-wise, but the volume is still very, 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 very low. And the reason he's taking threes, and partially the reason that they're going in at such a high rate, is because he's wide open. Teams help off him willingly. They're okay with him shooting threes. This is not a criticism on Sabonis by any means. Good on him for making the threes that have been given to him this year. But when you can run an offense the way Sabonis does, like initiating and orchestrating dribble handoffs. And really, to me, what you're doing is just diversifying the areas at which you can get into a pick and roll, because like that's what a dribble handoff is more often than not, unless you're a pick and pop kind of big. Like the guy's going to be curling off the screen and either driving, or if he's a good shooter, like in Kevin Huerter's case, they're going to be shooting the three. And, you know, being a good roll man, when, say, your defender has to step up and guard that shot off the screen, you're rolling into space and getting a pass and forcing defensive help from elsewhere. Stuff like that allows you to not be a floor spacer, because chances are you have other guys that you're operating with that are good floor spacers. So you have to have that infrastructure to be able to get away with that. But oftentimes the guys that don't need to be perimeter spacers are the guys that have the ball in their hands or that are facilitating things more often than not, because they're usually surrounded by guys that are able to capitalize on whatever advantages are created.
Yes. You hit the hammer on the head there. Like, Jimmy Butler, right? If you look at his last couple of years of 3-point volume, 16th percentile, 14th percentile, 16th percentile, 16th percentile, 16th percentile, 26th percentile, right? He's never shooting threes, okay? But has Jimmy Butler ever been played off of a playoff series? No, because he's on ball. And even if his defender, goes under on a pick and roll, that's problematic. But it's not drawing an extra defender to help because Jimmy Butler has the ball in his hands. And then the other type of player you talked about with Sabonis, if you're a big man, if you're a center and you can set screens and you can catch lobs and you can Sabonis can't do this, but a lot of the other big men who don't get played off the floor, if you can protect the rim because that's such a valuable part of the court, it's okay that you can't space the floor from the perimeter, right? The type of player so those two guys are kind of like the on-ball creator in the traditional-ish center or the passing hub center. Those guys, they don't really need to worry about this, right? If they have perimeter spacing, as we'll talk about in a second, it does make things easier on these non-shooters, but these guys don't have to worry about it. The players we're talking about are, to put it in the easiest term possible, they're role players. They're the guys who flank the on-ball creator. They flank Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. These are the kind of guys we're talking about. And if you're a role player, we talked about this 2 episodes ago with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. If you're a role player and you can shoot at a high volume, you're a proven shooter, teams respect you, you're good, you're golden. You'll be in every playoff series till the end of time. Those players have existed on every championship roster in the history of everything, right? What we're trying to figure out is, first, and we kind of answered this already when we're evaluating young players, is can you be that guy, right? And if you can, great, you're perfect. You're going to be, top 70 player for the rest of your days. Maybe if you learn how to be a great ball handler, you'll level up and be Paul George. Cool. What this podcast is about and what you got so perfectly with the Aaron Gordon example is, if you can't perimeter shoot, how do you avoid being Jarred Vanderbilt in the playoff series, right?
Yeah, and Jarred Vanderbilt, one thing that's worth pointing out when talking about him, Jarred Vanderbilt is generally, I think throughout his career, not just bad shooting wise. I know he had that one season in Utah where it was he might be able to shoot threes a little bit. And it was the volume was hilariously low. When he was in Utah, he shot 34% from 3 on 56 attempts, 37% from the corner. It's okay, that's cool, but that's less than 1 a game. It's not doing a whole lot as far as the implications for what a defense has to do to defend you, which we kind of covered on. But another thing with Jarred Vanderbilt that's it's not just that he doesn't shoot threes and can't shoot threes. He is also a reluctant scorer everywhere. Jarred Vanderbilt is oftentimes timid around the rim. His finishing percentages aren't terrible. In LA, it was kind of rough, 62% for a guy who's 6 foot, whatever he is, 6'9", 62% at the rim. It's not great, but the more concerning thing to me is that he is reluctant to put shots up at the rim in the first place and be a scorer. And that's a difference. That's the difference with a guy like Aaron Gordon. Aaron Gordon gets the ball off the catch in the corner and he attacks. He's going to the rim with the intention of scoring. He is attacking off that catch with the thought in his mind of, I am going to basically plow over whoever's in front of me. And he has some finesse too. Don't get me wrong. Got to give Aaron Gordon his credit here. He can bust out a little Euro step. He's a relatively skilled post scorer when he gets a mismatch. So I'm not taking anything away from his skill, but Aaron Gordon is big, he's fast, and when he gets the ball off the catch, he's going to the rim with the intention of scoring. Whereas with a guy like Jarred Vanderbilt, he gets the ball off in the corner because the defense helped off of him. He's kind of, he's going to maybe drive, but it's not going to be the most decisive drive you've ever seen in the world. He's going to go up, but you can tell he's a little bit scared of contact, and or he gets down there, sees a second defender come. He's going to maybe do a couple pump fakes and try to draw a foul, but then he doesn't get the whistle because he's Jarred Vanderbilt and he misses it. And it's all these different things make it very, very hard to succeed when, you're not shooting threes. We covered that. But when you're also scared to score at the rim, that's you got to make up for it somewhere. And for
Alex,
for guys like Aaron Gordon, that's where you make it up.
You did it. Oh, you're right there, man. I love this. Okay, so let's go back to the analogy you used early on, right? So it's Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic pick and roll. Say, well, middle pick and roll, we've seen this a million times, right? Two come to Murray or whatever. The guy who's helping off of Jokic, tags the low, gets in the low man spot, right? Okay, so he was guarding Gordon in the corner, gets in the low man spot, and Jokic, finds Gordon on the cut. Now, what often happens is like this: the rim protector will get back and contest the shot. It'll happen. Like, that's the thing about today's NBA is all these guys are so like well trained in terms of like how to move on a basketball court. Most of them know when to cut, right? The difference between Aaron Gordon and Jarred Vanderbilt, you said the word timid. I want you to use a different word. The word that really like kind of captures all of this to me, right? And before I use the word, I want to go back to something, right? So we keep talking about space. Generally speaking, you need space to win in basketball, right? Alex, let's think about our lives. I bet you the best games you've had of pickup probably were 3-on-3 as opposed to 5-on-5. Am I right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right. You probably had games where you scored like 13 of the 15 points, and then you're like thinking to yourself, like, man, I've gotten so much better. And then you get back on a 5-on-5 court and you can't drive to the rim. Why is that? Because you don't have any spacing, right? The spacing has changed completely. Okay, so like I asked a question on Twitter last year it was, I think, and I said of the last decade, because if you look back, all these teams that win NBA championships tend to have good spacing relative to their era, right? I'm like, who has the worst spacing? And I can't remember who it was, but the one answer I got that I really liked was the 2019-2020 LA Lakers, right? You look at that team, they are the great way to tell how good a team is at spacing on a team level is to look at their 3-point attempts, and they were the 23rd out of 30 teams in the league in 3-point attempts. So I'm sitting there, I'm like, obviously, they have LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Like, that helps a lot. But then you like look at this roster, right? And it's these big bodies like Kyle Kuzma. Obviously, they had, our guy Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. He was the lone floor spacer. But then you got a guy like Avery Bradley, big physical. Alex Caruso, big, strong. And you look at then I look at their rebounds, right? I look at their offensive rebound percentage, 4th in the NBA that season. Defensive rebound percentage, 7th in the NBA that season. So they're you can tell they're crashing the glass. And I tease the word already, but they play physical. I guess what I'm getting at, the reason Aaron Gordon works as opposed to Jarred Vanderbilt, the difference between the two of them is so simple. It's physicality. Aaron Gordon is strong enough when that rim protector comes and rotates over to try and contest his cut to finish through him. You know what I mean? He's strong, he's physical enough to stay in the dunker spot, to seal guys out of his way and get favorable positioning on the post. He's physical enough to drive through guys when they cut off his driving lane. Jarred Vanderbilt is not physical enough to do that. Some of that is biological. Like Aaron Gordon's, he's built like an Adonis. Jarred Vanderbilt's in very good shape, but he's more like a marathon build. But also a lot of it's on the inside. A lot of it is like how hard are you willing to play? And
how are you wired too?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that right there is one of the big ways. I think it's one of the ways to kind of defeat the poor perimeter spacing role player thing.
Yeah. There was one thing you said that I wanted to clarify just as like a caveat here. Cause there's a chance it's running through some people's heads. But like,
is it Avery Bradley didn't play in the summer league? I mean, in the
no.
Oh, okay.
You didn't say anything wrong. It was just a clarification I wanted to make about, like, let's say, for example, you'll see the Kings do it a lot. You actually saw the Suns do it against the Kings in their most recent matchup. When the Kings would be, say, running a dribble handoff with like Kevin Huerter and Sabonis, you'd obviously have the two defenders. And then let's say like Harrison Barnes and Keegan Murray were in one corner, and then I don't know, De'Aaron Fox in another. And the three defenders would just be kind of like hanging out, waiting to see how the play develops. When you're set up like that, and you have like the two defenders on the actual like on ball action happening, just because a defense may be sagging off of somebody in the corner and clogging driving lanes and clogging up space, you still have something that I think the Kings do really well is they capitalize on like mid-range space. I think they're like the fourth highest. They have the fourth highest mid-range frequency in the NBA. And they hit it at I believe above average rate. Like they're one of the best three mid-range shooting teams in the NBA. So like they have forwards who can use that space as well to shoot. Sabonis even does it pretty frequently. We're not talking about those guys who like kind of have some of that mid-range prowess. That's not like the kind of player, like some guys can't
Keegan
shoot
and
threes,
Barnes
but they can.
Keegan and Barnes can shoot threes too, though. They're like, you know what I mean? They're like,
No, yeah,
they're spacers.
absolutely. No, I'm with you. I'm just saying like, if anyone's thinking about space as like this very specific thing of like, okay, well, just because you're packing the paint doesn't mean you don't have any space on the floor. It's like, yeah, we agree. You can still have space to work with, but you have to have the players that can work with that space.
Exactly.
A guy like Jarred Vanderbilt cannot work with that space is what we're saying. Just a clarification that I wanted to make real quick.
1,000,000% agree with you. But yeah, that's like today the NBA is too advanced now. Like it used to be, like there was teams out there that just like had poor, I call it like spacing deployment. Like the guys on the court were just standing in bad spots. Like they could not, you know what I mean? But now like the NBA, everybody knows like where to stand. It's not like, you know, they're not stupid. The thing is like, can you make people pay for where you're standing? Right. And so like Vanderbilt, I'm sure he's been told by his coach, like, since you can't shoot, Vanderbilt, you need to be able to attack off the catch. You need to be able to cut. You need to be able to play in the dunker spot. He can't. Okay, he knows that, but he can't do it at a level to where the defense actually hurts, and he can still, to where the opposing team is getting hurt by him, and he can still provide his defensive value, whereas Aaron Gordon can. And I think that's the big thing here. A couple other before we stay. A couple other kind of ways before we start to talk about, you know, some young players that might be affected by this kind of phenomenon. I think one thing about Jarred, like I think Jarred Vanderbilt still has a place in the league, like a place playing a lot of minutes in the league. He needs to find a team where all four guys other than him can shoot the ball above average. And you're like, well, where do you find that? I think the Phoenix Suns can play a roster like that pretty easily. I think the Indiana Pacers can do it. So that is another pathway. It's just like there's less environments with that kind of roster construction, so that makes you less valuable if you can fit into less teams than another guy. Yeah, there's that, and I think the other. Go ahead.
Well, there's one other thing that I want to see if you feel this way as well.
Okay,
but I think another area where these non-shooting bigs can make up a lot of their quote-unquote negative value on the offensive side of the ball is screening, not necessarily on ball, but like off ball screening. This is another area where you can point to the Nuggets and be like, the Nuggets do this great because they're kind of just the like poster child for good offensive execution. But like something that you'll see, watch any Nuggets game this year, Jamal Murray, Jokic running a pick and roll, and Aaron Gordon's on the strong side corner. Jamal Murray drives right into the strong side defense. They're helping off the strong side corner because it's Aaron Gordon in the corner. But then you have Christian Brown and KCP in the corner, and Christian Brown is setting a screen at the dunker spot so that the rotating defender to defend the kick out to the weak side, that defender is going to get stuck on his screen. Not saying Christian Brown's developed as a shooter. Credit to him. I'm using him as an example of like, okay, yeah, just because you're not shooting threes on a given possession, or you're not the guy in the corner during a pick and roll in the weak side, you can still contribute offensively by knowing, okay, I have KCP in the corner on the weak side with me, and they're running a pick and roll on the strong side with 3 defenders, maybe 4, depending on how the defense is behaving. I can set a screen here, and if they kick to that weak side corner where KCP's waiting, we're going to have the easiest 3 ever if I can get his defender or the rotating defender stuck on my screen. So guys like Jarred Vanderbilt, that's something that I don't see him doing a whole lot. And that's an issue.
Mm-hmm. Well, Christian Braun's another great example because he also got to play minutes all throughout the postseason. He had a big, game 4 against the Miami Heat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think it all comes down to that. I know it's so simplified, but it's all physicality. I really think a Christian Braun exit screen or pin and screen hits different than a Jarred Vanderbilt one. Like Jarred Vanderbilt's so wiry, you could kind of if you're good enough, you could Euro step around it. And still kind of contest the shot. And I think that situation is like the lowest hanging fruit. Like I feel like that's the least valuable of all those things we're talking about too. So even if Vanderbilt can do that, like Braun's just better at being in the dunker spot. He's better at cutting. Have you seen Braun get up there? Dude, that guy can get up there. He's a nice 2-footed leaper.
He's a great athlete.
Mm-hmm. And so it's like I think it's all of that stuff, right? The screening, on ball and off ball, the cutting, the dunker spotting, knowing how to flip sides in the dunker spot. Another thing I haven't mentioned yet is offensive rebounding, right? All those things, they all kind of fall under this physicality umbrella. And like when you realize that, like you know how I know it's a thing? Now that I've like picked up on it, I've noticed every broadcast I listen to former players, former coaches always talk about physicality. And I used to think it was just like an old guy thing. But now it's like it's starting to hit in my head what they're talking about because they know that if you don't the Platon, and this goes back to the Denver Nuggets because they're the epitome of team building right now, right? They have the best built team, at least best built 7 guys. Like if you don't have spacing, right, you need physicality to win. But when you have both, you're like damn near unstoppable. And that's like the Denver Nuggets. They combine great spacing with physicality. But that's just an aside. Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at with all that. Another thing I wanted to talk about really quickly, because you kind of hit this with the mid-range shooting thing. I think the other way to be this is a little bit more rare because usually if you are this type of player, you're on ball more. But if you're a tough shot maker, it really doesn't bother you if they're pack at the paint because like that's what you live for. You know what I mean? Like I was watching the Pelicans play the Timberwolves, right? And in my head, you sit there and you do the math. You're like, okay, Timberwolves have all this paint protection, all this defense. Like they're going to be able to load up on the Pelicans, and it's going to be a tough day for the Pelicans. It's like a December game, I think, and the Pelicans ended up beating them pretty handedly. And obviously some of it was because of Zion Williamson's physicality, like being stronger than like Jaden McDaniels, who's a guy I want to talk about in a second. But then some of it was like Brandon Ingram just hitting tough shots against a paint with like 5 dudes in it, So that's like that also goes into it, I think. And that's another thing Aaron Gordon possesses as well that he's pretty solid at.
So last thing I'll say before we get into these other players is we're not saying that like there are examples of guys who they do just enough offensively and then are just so overwhelmingly great at defense that it makes up for their deficiencies on the offensive end. But that's kind of what we're talking is like, what is just enough? Like, what are these things that you can do to make up for that discrepancy between your offense and defense? Because oftentimes these guys are generally good defenders. Like with Jarred Vanderbilt, that's what you're hoping for with him. It's like you want a plus defender, even if he's a minus on offense. How can you narrow that gap and make up as much ground as possible? And I think we've pretty much hit on a lot of the areas that you can do it. So yeah, let's get into the players that we're looking at.
Just one more point real quick. Also physicality is a relative thing. Like it's not like a thing you have or don't. Like you have to like, this will be a great thing to do in the postseason, right? When you're like looking at teams, like for example, the Miami Heat were more physical than the Boston Celtics last year, but they also got outmatched physically by the Denver Nuggets. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's all on a spectrum. It's like with spacing, like you have more spacing than some teams, you have less spacing than others. But with that said, continue, Alex, please.
Oh no, let's just, I was just going to say, let's get into the players that I've got some players listed here that I'm sure are probably some of the same players that you have listed that are good examples and bad. Well, I have good examples in the sense that like they do the things that they need to do to narrow that gap. But I also have guys who are kind of like, I don't know if they're going to do it. I don't know if they'll be able to make it work. So you want to go first?
Let's get the cat out of the hat now. What do you think of like Jaden McDaniels? Because to me, like he's a better shooter than most of these guys, but the shooting has fallen off a little bit this year. And the thing with him, it's like, and that's why I compared Bilal Coulibaly to him a lot, where it's like I could see him being a good shooter, but like if the shooting is so important, it's more important to him than it is to like a lot of these other guys, because I don't see him like being physical. Like I know he's got that nice handle and stuff, but like he doesn't like drive through guys. He isn't good in the dunker spot. He's not somebody who like fights for a lot of contested. His contested rebound rate is pretty low relative to the rest of the league. So I'm worried about him.
So one thing I will say about Jaden McDaniels that makes it tough for me to have a ton of concerns about where he slots in this discussion of this kind of archetype. He is very effective at the rim, 73% on the year, which is 90th percentile. He can do, I think, long mid-range is not his game. You know, those actual true like KCP kind of one dribble pull-ups off of attacking a closeout. That's not his game, but he's kind of got like a nice little floater game that he's able to leverage a good amount. He's like 50% floater range this year, which I think helps. And while I think his overall 3-point percentage is a little kind of like, I think this year he's had a bit more diversity of like where his 3-pointers are coming from, because he's still a 40% corner 3-point shooter on pretty significant volume, to where I'm like, okay, even if you can't hit like the above the break threes, even if you can't kind of stand in like the shooting guard spot, you can still hit corner threes and we're good with you being a 40% corner 3-point shooter. That's fine. But he's like a 25% non-corner 3-point shooter, which is like, all right, you got to be picky about the positions that you put him in. Honestly, my biggest complaint with Jaden McDaniels this year is in transition. I think he's been a terrible, terrible, terrible transition scorer. Different discussion for a different pod. But I think with him, if things were to continue on a downward slope, then he would be in that discussion to me of like, is this a guy who did not adapt enough? Because, well, I think his perimeter skills are right now fine for what he brings to you on the defensive end. He's had a defensive slip this year, which, again, different discussion for a different podcast. He does not do the non-perimeter things well enough right now to where I'd be like, okay, if the perimeter stuff falls off a cliff, how are you as a cutter? I don't think he brings a whole lot as far as cutting goes. Granted, when that's not your role, you're not thinking about it as much. So it's kind of like, how much can you knock a guy for not doing something that he's not being asked to do? So yeah, for me, it would just be like, could he do those things if it came down to it, if the shot, failed him and it wasn't something that he could leverage? But I don't know. In my opinion, we have four seasons now of him being a 40% corner 3-point shooter on average, that I'm like, that's a guy who's probably going to be fine, especially with the volume. The volume is in a good place.
I'll also say that in the one games I've seen, I think I saw him play the Kings earlier this year, and they put like I think it might have been Duarte or Fox on him, smaller guy who wasn't like super bulky either. And he's able to kind of elevate over them when he's attacking a closeout and get to that little push shot floater. So he can leverage all that. Yeah, I agree with you there. I'm just I feel like the thing is, it's on shaky ground for me, because it's like, if the shot's gone, like I think it's going to be a real culture shock for him in the playoffs. And I could see like a situation where maybe he just has like a Kevin Huerter, where he just shoots poorly the first 2 or 3 games of a postseason series, and it completely like just stunts his confidence. And then it's like,
yeah,
he can't be on the floor. So that's an interesting one. What about, actually you go next, you name a guy.
So I think this guy is a weird one to talk about with this archetype. But I think he's kind of had to slot into this role lately. Josh Giddey.
Oh,
Josh Giddey is a forward who is not a floor spacer. And what you can cite whatever improvement you want as far as percentages go. He is not a floor spacer. Teams are happy to leave him open from everywhere. He does not have a quick release. And okay, so you say he can't shoot threes, or he's not shooting threes, or teams are giving up the three from Josh Giddey. Okay. What can he attack closeouts then? No. He's got mediocre foot speed. The handle is pretty underwhelming, even though it has shown some improvement. It's like when you're improving from bad to, still not great. It's like, okay, how much does that really matter on the scale of like NBA basketball? It's like, it doesn't really progressing from bad to like below average. It doesn't mean a whole lot. So creating off the catch from getting those open corner kickouts, it's like he's not doing a whole lot there. What is he bringing to you? Can he get by a defender, draw a double team? Not really. Teams are pretty happy to defend him one-on-one. Finishing wise, he's a pretty mediocre finisher. He makes cool passes sometimes. He can throw an inbounds play. So what you have there is a specialist to me. Is his defense good? No. Josh Giddey's a bad defender. So I look at him as like very rapidly approaching a crossroads of like, and it's not just a question for him. It's also a question for the coaching staff, front office, et cetera, et cetera. How are you going to use him? Are you going to keep trying to develop the on-ball stuff? Or are you going to keep trying to turn him into a floor spacer and get that three-point volume up and get that three-point efficiency up to the point where defenses have to honor that? And then you also have to make sure that he can capitalize on those kickouts, not just shooting and making the threes, but attacking closeouts, getting to the rim, finishing. You're going to have to develop all that too. Or do you just say, okay, he's not going to be a floor spacer? Is he the size of like an Aaron Gordon or a Jarred Vanderbilt? No. Does he have the length of a Aaron Gordon or a Jarred Vanderbilt? No. Does he have the athleticism of an Aaron Gordon or a Jarred Vanderbilt? No. So some players, I guess the point I'm getting at with all of this is you just will not be able to turn into some players do not have the necessary tools to adapt from being a non-shooting wing. That's what we've been discussing, is these non-shooting wings, these non-shooting forwards. Not only do you have to be able to offset the things you're deficient in, you also have to have the natural tools to offset those. Because if you don't, then it's like, okay, you can improve the ball handling all you want. You can improve the, quickness of your release or your finishing percentages on wide open cuts at the rim. Yeah, you can improve that stuff all you want. But if you're not able to deal with physicality, if you're not able to leverage your length and leverage your size, then the discussion is void at that point. It doesn't matter. And to me, Josh Giddey doesn't have the screening aspect that we discussed. The defense isn't there. And obviously the shooting's not there. So really, there's just not much that you could do to like salvage this player. So my question with all of this is like, how do you salvage Josh Giddey in the world of salvaging these non-shooting bigs? is there any way he can be saved?
Yeah. I mean, not in this role, no. You really just, I hope his mom doesn't hear that one, dude. You just lit him up. Jesus Christ. No, I was looking at this Giddey at least can like attack a closeout. What is he talking about? Look, it's 23rd percentile in drives true shooting this season. That's the exact same it was last year. 17th percentile the year before. So yeah, he's not attacking closeouts. I think that's a consequence of his lack of physicality on being able to handle the bigger guys they usually put on him. The thing with Giddey is like, I don't even think he belongs in this conversation because like these guys, all the guys we're talking about are like so good on defense that you want to figure out a way to have him on the court. Whereas Giddey's just like not it on defense. There's like a good chance, man. Like when the playoffs start, he'll be the worst guy starting for a playoff team in the entire dance. He really just needs to. He's one of those guys who can. The only way to salvage him is to make him an on-ball guy. And is he good enough to be an on-ball guy? We haven't really seen it yet. He's always played with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I wonder what it looks like if he gets traded to a bad team. Like he should be on the Brooklyn Nets. That'd be fun. Put him on the Brooklyn Nets. Let him flank Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Nick Claxton. See what happens. All right, we should probably get off the Giddey one, man. You just killed him right there. You buried him. But those are all good points. What do you think of Alex Caruso?
So to me, that's a guy who provides. Obviously, the defense is elite. Like being a top 2 to 3 guard defender in the NBA makes up a lot of ground. And then like offensively, he can make the right pass. He can, come off a screen and work with it a little bit. Obviously, you don't want him facilitating your entire offense. But like, yeah, he can handle a pick and roll every now and then and work with it. And then obviously he's developed as a 3-point shooter to where like I'm pretty sure the volume is still relatively low, but like the percentage.
No, it's good, dude. 62nd percentile volume.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like he's done enough, plenty. I'd say.
Yeah, I think he's 76th percentile efficiency, 62nd percentile volume. But I think on top of that, he's another way you can like figure out if a guy's like a physical guy. You can maybe by the matchups they get on defense. And Caruso, like we regularly see him switch on to bigger guys and kind of hang with them. So that tells you he has like a penchant for getting his hands dirty. I should look at his drive shooting because he's a pretty solid attacker too off drives. He's a really good passer. Yeah. So how about this 88th percentile drive true shooting this season?
That's
pretty
really
impressive. Yeah, really good. That's why I'm also bullish on a guy like Deni Avdija. I think he's super strong. I think he reminds me a lot of – he's like less physically athletic, better passing version of Aaron Gordon to me. Deni Avdija is just super – he's like a bull in a china shop. You like Deni?
Yeah, I think he's probably almost getting to the point where it's hard to have him in this discussion just because of like he's also got some decent on-ball juice in some areas. But yeah, I think – in terms of like worst case scenario, yeah, he could be like that type of guy where it's like, okay, 3-point shot is limited, but like you're so good at so many other things that it's like, yeah, well, who cares? You provide enough value.
Here's one. This is the one we probably should have led with. I think this might be the biggest one of this postseason. Now that I think about it, do you think you know what I'm talking about? Maybe.
We'll see.
Herbert Jones.
Ooh. So my question to you is, how do you feel about Herb Jones as a passer? And do you think his volume is eventually going to get to a point where like he can work his way out of this realm of discussion?
You mean the shooting? Like he's just going to become like a good shooter? Are you asking me if I think that?
Yeah. Do you think that
right now
like, there's enough to – because I think like efficiency-wise, obviously the number's gone up, the volume's gone up year over year. And, something like corner 3-point shooting, which is pretty important when talking about this. He's 46% corner 3-point shooter on decent volume. But like at any given time with that team, aside from Zion Williamson, he's like – your worst spacer on the floor.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that?
So he's a weird one because, like, in his bones. So, okay, first of all, 3-point shooting. He's 96th percentile overall 3-point shooting percentage on 36th percentile volume. I don't like that. And then in the last 3 years on wide open 3-pointers, which is a really good spacing indicator, he's only in the 22nd percentile. Again, he's apparently gotten a lot better this season. I just worry, like, is this just like a variance thing? He just got really high. He's a corner merchant. Maybe in the postseason, he gets Jarrett Allen. Lights are too bright. As a passer, I think he's solid. He's not like Denny or Caruso level.
No.
He's average, drives attacker off the catch. He's a weird one to me because he's like he doesn't look like Aaron Gordon physically, but he's so strong, and I feel like he is strong enough to kind of because the big thing about the physicality thing is not just playing the dunker spot, but when you're attacking off the catch, the paint's going to be closed, right? I mean, packed. So you have to be able to fight through the trees and kind of get your shot off. And I think he's capable of it. I don't know. He's a weird one to me because I feel like everyone's kind of like, oh, Herb Jones improved shooter. No problems are going to happen this postseason with him. They've kind of already removed him from this group. When I'm I don't know for sure. I don't know yet. I wish the Pelicans would have won. Actually, wait, he was in the playoffs his rookie season. Why can't I recall how he did there?
He played one game in the. Sorry, I'm blind. He played 8 games his rookie year in the playoffs. He only played one in his 2022-2023 postseason. But in the playoffs in 2022, 4 of 10 on non-corner threes, 4 of 9 on corner threes. So
okay.
Hilariously small volume.
Yeah,
42% overall.
I think. Okay, who do you feel more confident about this postseason, him or Jaden McDaniels?
Just in terms of spacing or
just being able to stay on the floor?
Herb Jones, but that's not necessarily a major slight on Jaden McDaniels. I say Herb Jones because Minnesota has the advantage of, okay, Jaden McDaniels isn't working out super well. We're going to change the lineups up, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker is going to get increased load of some of the Jaden McDaniels minutes, and we'll just kind of shore up the rotation accordingly. I think Minnesota has that advantage where it's okay, it's not the end of the world if Jaden McDaniels isn't panning out super well because we have Nickeil Alexander-Walker who he may not be necessarily the floor spacer, although Nickeil Alexander-Walker is another discussion of a guy who's improved as a floor spacer. Even though he may not necessarily be the floor spacer that Jaden McDaniels is in a vacuum, you're getting the extra passing stuff and the ability to drive, and then also all world level defense. Whereas the Pelicans, it's Herb Jones. It's no, you need Herb Jones because he's so important to your defense. You can't get away with not having him.
Okay. Wait, what about Nickeil? You think you trust Nickeil in a playoff series? I see he's got, looking at his 3-point shooting, he's also 71st percentile efficiency, 65th percentile volume.
I'm not saying I'm necessarily sold on him by any means, but more just a situation of okay, one thing's not working out, we can try this other thing. That's kind of the advantage that Minnesota has over the Pelicans in that theoretical situation of okay, this guy's getting played off the floor. I don't think you could play Herb Jones off the floor because there's not somebody who can come onto the floor that can come close to providing what Herb Jones provides, whether on offense or on defense, or bringing value that Herb Jones provides.
Yeah. And it's funny. So you mentioned the guy who could replace him. I think he's hurt right now. I'm 100% sure he's hurt. Dyson Daniels. He is a guy I don't think is ready.
Bad floor spacing.
Yeah, he's not ready, I don't think, for the physicality element. I don't think he has. I don't know if he will have it because he is such an incredible passer and he is a big body. But no, not right now. I don't think he's ready. Yeah, incredible defender. Let me see if there's any other guys because we could kind of just do this all day. I don't think we should. Oh, here's a great example of a guy who's he's kind of been just omitted into like basketball purgatory. Like he plays on a bad team, he gets minutes there, but like everyone's kind of come to the realization, and he's a perfect example of all of this. I'm surprised we haven't mentioned him once. Matisse Thybulle.
I was going to mention him earlier.
Yeah, he can't shoot the three ball. He can't drive. He can't play physical in the dunker spot. Not like a great contested rebounder. And that's like, that's what happens to you is like I still think, dude, I've been watching a ton of Trailblazers games lately for Scoot and Tamani, who, by the way, I think Tamani is a guy who can handle the physicality. But he's still one of the best defenders in the world. Like still one of the best perimeter defenders in the world. Still one of the most chaos-inducing agents the game has ever seen. But the problem is you can't – there's like no situation where he can stick on the floor on offense unless he played for like – again, like I said, like the Indiana Pacers.
Yeah. Another guy, good example of like someone who's overcome the like deficiencies of not being a quote-unquote floor spacer, Gary Payton II. Gary Payton II is like a 99th percentile cutter. Mm-hmm. And like an all-world defender, before the knee stuff, because I know injuries kind of like put a huge damper on everything. But like Gary Payton II was able to overcome being, especially on the Golden State Warriors, playing alongside Draymond Green, who like I know Draymond Green has had his flashes in the pan of being like, yeah, you can shoot threes now. It's like that's sporadic, and you're not necessarily like building your whole team around that. It's like Gary Payton II worked next to Draymond Green. They had two non-floor spacers, theoretically. Granted, you're playing alongside Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Andrew Wiggins, who at the time was a great three-point shooter. Different discussion, but like, that's an example of like Gary Payton II was able to overcome that with the defensive value, of course. I think that's kind of step one in this discussion. But then you got to integrate the cutting. And like, okay, if you are going to take the threes, even if you're only taking like one or two a game, can you get it in there 34% of the time? And even then it's like, it's not like it's doing that much for you. Like even Matisse Thybulle, it's like, yeah, he's not even taking the threes. But then the cutting's not there. He can't handle that physicality. Gary Payton II is, for lack of a better word, he's a dog. He's got the physicality.
Oh yeah, that's a great one. We could do this all day.
This is just guys naming.
Yeah, guys
players.
Being dudes now.
Yeah.
Aaron Nesmith's done a great job. He's a shooter now too, so he's just something else entirely.
He's evolved. He leveled up.
Jalen Suggs. Do you buy the Suggs shooting?
I do.
Okay.
I buy it a lot because the volume, like, and difficulty of the shots has gone up, and I'm like, I don't know. It's too diverse of like a 3-point shooting profile for me to be like, oh, he's just open and like making threes more. It's like, no, you're like creating like rhythm threes for yourself that you like clearly are confident hitting. That's where I'm like, yeah, I buy this a lot.
All right. Last one for you. Dean Wade.
Do I buy the 3-point shot?
Do you buy the 3-point shot? If you don't, do you think he's physical enough to make it work? That's real quick. That was a big reason why Evan Mobley struggled so much alongside Jarrett Allen. He's not physical enough.
Yep.
But continue. Go ahead.
Well, with Evan Mobley too, it's like I go back to like there are certain physical tools that you have to overcome these things. And I'm not saying that Evan Mobley isn't a strong player. I'm sure Evan Mobley is an incredibly strong person. But he is lanky. He is not a particularly strong accelerator. And like acceleration, like your top speed in the half court only is going to get you so far. It's a lot more about acceleration when you're dealing with such short distances. Because that's like going to put more pressure on the defense than like your top speed. And Evan Mobley is like, he's a good athlete, but he's a relatively underwhelming, just pure burst. He doesn't have a whole lot in the way of that. And I think that's the big issue with him. It's like, you have to have some level of like natural athletic attributes. Like there's certain boxes that you have to check that are going to allow you to deal with that physicality. or even be in the position to like, okay, can you get to the point where you can deal with this physicality? It's like, it's a lot harder to deal with that physicality when you can't even get by your first defender in the first place. You're not going to be as willing to go into the trees when you couldn't get past the first guy who was closing out. Yada, 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 different discussion. We could do a whole episode on Evan Mobley. Dean Wade, though, one, I buy the 3-point shot, especially after that one game. Who were they playing?
Celtics.
The Celtics. Especially after that game against the Celtics, I'm like, you can shoot threes, dude. They were like the definition of just like rhythm threes. Like they were open gym practice, like transition spot up threes. Like, just when I see stuff like that, I can tell that you practice that. Like, that is your role that you are taught in practice, in the off season. That's what you're training. That's what you're working on. And the difference with Dean Wade versus like a Gary Payton, they're not having Gary Payton come off screens for catch and shoot 3-point opportunities. The Warriors were not doing that. That's not something that was happening, at least consistently, or like it wasn't an intentional part of their offense. When you watch the Cavs offense operate, it's a lot of these like early, like wide action screens with like Dean Wade coming off the pin and getting it with like 20 seconds left on the shot clock and pulling. They're practicing that. That is his role, and they're making a concerted effort to get that shot. And when you hit it at that rate, it's like, okay, I buy this a lot more than the guy who like, oh, the defense is leaving him open and he's having an increased year on corner 3-point shooting. It's like, yeah, but that's not like your role. With Dean Wade, it's like they want him doing that. They are making sure that he gets the reps he needs to be able to do that, which is why I buy it a lot more than like just a guy who, oh, he's shooting 36% from three this year on like, 4 attempts a game. It's like, okay. But that's just defenses leaving him open. Longer than I expected to talk about Dean Wade for, but here we are.
No, it was well said. Really well said.
Do you have any more players? I guess like we mentioned Draymond Green. Draymond Green's like
he's
such
different.
an outlier. It's not even fair to He's a Hall of Fame. He's a Hall of Fame caliber non-shooting wing, and even then, he's still in his prime years. Technically could shoot threes.
Well, I mean, I'll say I'll say this really quickly. First, now he's a center, so he falls in that one category. But there's one other, I think, way of getting around this, being a non-shooter. But again, it's more something outside of you, and it's if you play with like a god tier shooter, because they basically count as like two shooters, and like Steph Curry, god tier, Klay Thompson used to be god tier, so that was also so that you have that, you can get away with like multiple non-shooters on the floor around that. Miami does that sometimes with Duncan Robinson, but that has less to do with these people as individuals and more as environment type thing.
Yeah, absolutely. One more player.
Okay.
I actually just saw this on my notes. Jalen Johnson.
Ooh.
I think he's a fun one to do this exercise with. Even though he's kind of teetering on the point where like he's doing enough on ball that I'm like, okay, you're probably wriggling your way out of this conversation.
Well, I mean, it's especially because he plays with Clint Capella and Onyeka Okongwu. So, I mean, the thing is, so you look at the 3-point shooting real quick. Yeah, he's not a shooter. 42nd percentile, 3-point percentage, 27th percentile volume. So non-shooter. But like back to the physicality component. Have you seen this guy dunk the basketball? He yams on people. I'm not saying like dunking means physical. But the way he does it is just dangerous. And it's like, I guess we should also mention this. Like there is a skill component to being like physical. Like you talk about it, like being able to kind of like, you have to be able to continue to maintain your handle while you're driving through somebody's body, which is something like we mentioned Isaiah Stewart at the beginning of the podcast. He can't really do that. And so Yeah, and then Jalen Johnson also good at playing the dunker spot. I think he's a pretty instinctive cutter.
He's got the mid-range element too.
Yeah,
which
he's
I
a very
think helps
good passer.
him a lot.
He's kind of like again, he goes back to, it's like the more athletic Denny Avdia for me type player. More athletic, a little bit less of a passer type player than Denny Avdia. So yeah, I think he would hold his own in a playoff series right now.
Yeah, definitely.
He played last season, didn't he? Right? He was getting minutes against the Celtics.
Yeah, he played 7 games. Wow. I mean, I'm not even going to mention the volume because the volume's so small. From 3, he was a non-factor, but 73%. I mean, 11 attempts. He was not clearly not scoring much at all in that series. I think the big thing with him is he can do like the off-ball stuff. I think with him, there's a lot more value to be extracted on ball as like a second side creator that is not being tapped into as much, which I might do a whole video on because I think he's a really interesting player, but different discussion for a different day. But I think that's going to wrap it up for the non-shooting big man or non-shooting wing forward special of the podcast. This was a very, honestly, this was probably one of the most difficult episodes to prepare for, just because like there's so many different factors at play with players like this and so many different things that they have to do to. Specialists are such a weird thing in today's NBA, just because I think players are being asked to do more and more. And like with how important 3-point shooting is in general in today's NBA, if you can't shoot threes at like high volume and defenses don't consider you as a factor in terms of perimeter shooting, like you have a harder time. You are going to be asked to do even more than like a 3-point specialist that's already being asked to do more, like a Duncan Robinson. It's like he was shooting threes and he was shooting threes well, but he had to learn how to do even more. And the guys who can't shoot threes, it's like you have to learn to do even more than that. You have to be an elite defender. You have to be a complimentary passer, et cetera, et cetera. So this episode was a fun mental exercise and a fun puzzle to solve, so to speak.
I think it's really important. Before we close out, I think it's important to do this because like every season I feel like we get surprised by like a guy or two who just gets played off the floor, and I think doing this exercise in your head is really good, like a really good way to project that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So be on the lookout for players that might succumb to the lights being too bright in the playoffs in this like vein, because I mean you can predict that stuff. There's signs. There's always signs. But as always, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave a 5-star rating on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Leave a like. If you have a question for us, be sure to leave a comment, and we'll hopefully answer it on next episode. If we have too many, we might, again, have to do a special or something like that. But follow us on Twitter at AlexHoops_, at Mat Issa 15, MATISSA 15. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.